Welcome to your year 2021 Zodiac forecast. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd be honoured if you'd subscribe to my channel. Now I'm going to provide a penetrative insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs, so please stay with me for that. But just to say, if you'd like to ascend beyond your zodiac sign, which is just based on the location of the sun and how the planets interact with that, and find out what this new year will hold for you as an individual, there is nothing more accurate and telling than a personal forecast. Now you can get your 12-month personal forecast for 2021 plus a character analysis for 30% off, a special offer. Please see the link below. But also know, if you order in 2020, I'll give you the rest of 2020 free. So if you order in October, you get October, November, December, plus the following 12 months. Now your zodiac forecast is going to be of great interest to you, of course, and it does give us a fascinating insight into what we can expect. But of course, the zodiac or the horoscope contains much more information than just our sun. And that's where that personal horoscope comes in. But also, as we start each year, we have a solar return. And I want you to think of that solar return at midnight on the 1st of January 2021 as like your personal birth chart. It gives us a blueprint of what we can all expect collectively for this new year. So I'm going to share that information next. But when I go into your zodiac forecast, I'll be sharing different wheels, the different eclipses, to give you a really big opportunity to get a feel for what's coming for you. But astrology is basically the study of time. And when events happen in the past, when particular planetary alignments occur, when we look forwards to see when those alignments will happen again, it gives us a bit of a clue of what we can expect. And the fascinating thing, of course, is that as 2020 came to a close on the 5th of December, Saturn moved back into Aquarius. It had been there from the 22nd of March to the 2nd of August, 2020. But it moves from the cold sign of Capricorn, which it governs in its dignity. It's the sole ruler of Capricorn. And it moved into the sign of Aquarius, where it's the co-regent, along with Uranus, December, by Jupiter. And then on the 21st of December, they came into a conjunction. And that conjunction is still there. It's not quite exact, but it's still there as we begin this new year. Now, what we can learn from those past events is that the last time this happened was in fact in 1405. So a very, very long time ago. And that was on the 7th of January. And I think what began at that time was the Cultural Revolution, in a way. So what we can expect this year is a revolution, that's for sure. And of course we were seeing elements of that revolution beginning last year. And part of the revolution can be evolution. It doesn't always have to be turbulent, but there are certain parts of what happened in 2020 that were, of course, very turbulent. Now, the conjunction that goes between the planets of Jupiter, which is about expansion and growth and optimism, and Saturn, which is about resistance, obstacles, boundaries, tradition, usually happens just under every 20 years, about 19.8 years. This is because Jupiter takes 11.8 years to go through its cycle, and Saturn takes 29.5 years to complete its cycle. And over the last 1,000 years, predominantly, the three signs that this conjunction has occurred in most of all are of Sagittarius, Capricorn and Pisces. So that's what makes this Aquarius conjunction so absolutely blindingly exciting. Now it's also true to say that the eclipse cycle that we welcomed in on the 14th of December 2020 was the Saros cycle that is featuring the polar axes of Sagittarius and Gemini. Now that began on the 30th of May 1984 in the sign of Gemini with a solar eclipse. And if we look back to when eclipse cycles begin, that gives us a big idea of what they may bring in their wake. So that one had Saturn and Mars conjunct in the sign of Scorpio, very much to do with finance, but also to do with desire, could even say lust. But Saturn, of course, is about discipline, it's about those structures, and Mars, certainly in its second home zone of Scorpio, is very much about desire. So you can see that a certain amount of repression would come from that particular conjunction, but also the potential to work very hard on resources. And I think in terms of the material world, there's been a lot of development since 1984, and some people would argue a lot of growth. But on the other side of the heavens, where the eclipse occurred, not only did we have the solar eclipse in the wonderful, quick-witted Gemini, we also had Venus there, which is very flirty and alluring and attractive. But we also had Chiron, and that is the wounded healer, and that was conjunct the North Node and Venus. So for me, this pattern that we're beginning this year, or picking up the thread of, which has been rejuvenated by the solar eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th of December, which forged an amazingly positive angle to Mars. So I think we're all going to be feeling a lot more hopeful as we come to the end of this year, because last year, 2020, was just so terribly trying. I think we are going to have a much greater sense of momentum, a much greater sense that something is shifting and moving in our consciousness, our way of being. But I think that gathering of energy back in 1984 in Gemini was really a lot to do with the way society has changed since then, not just in a material sense, but also in a social sense. So we've seen a mass transformation in the way we consume information, the media, which has come through the internet, and of course printed media has declined quite sharply, but they're very much governed by the sign of Gemini. So we could say that Chiron, the wounded healer, being in that part of the situation in conjunction with Venus, points towards a wound in what we believe in. And I think with that energy all clustered together based on universal central time in the 8th house of transformation, very Scorpionic itself, and Mars and Saturn in conjunction in Scorpio, we have had a lot of lust since 1984, and we have had a lot of challenges to ideas, because if we go back to that time, I think there was much more of an orthodox that most people were expected to fit into. People have found their voices, they expect to have their voice. Now on the other side of the heavens, with the solar eclipse that occurred on the 14th of December 2020, Sagittarius energy is about the higher principle of communication. So it's about philosophy, it's about the intellect, it's about history, travel, it's about borders. It can be about laws and regulations, but it's very much to do with trying to find the higher principles of society. And because it forged an amazing link with Mars, I think both being fire signs, after the really pulverizing difficulties of 2020, which saw the end of an eclipse cycle between the axes of Cancer, which is ruled by the moon, so that's very much to do with emotion, the family, security, the seas, the waters, if you like, and on the other side, the harsh, cold reality of business, big industries, and materialism in perhaps its most extreme form, which has battled with the need to find emotional security on the other side of the heavens in Cancer. So we've had this big battle going on over the last couple of years, which has really been very difficult. And I feel that obviously there are some institutions, some business strands, some countries which will try to withhold or to hold on to power in a very oppressive way. And on the other side of the heavens, we had the moon is the repressed emotions that have been held down for a long time, especially to do with civil rights and people speaking up much more ardently about what they want. So the Sagittarius energy that is coming along, which re-evokes that first 1984 eclipse in Gemini, when this Saros cycle eclipse cycle began is very much about communication and information. So this year we're going to see a lot of sharing of ideas, that's for sure. And of course, we're seeing a lot of polarization in people's viewpoints and a lot of outspoken expression of ideas, and sometimes not enough tolerance. So that's an interesting principle. So as we come into this new year, although Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, and of course it was co-present with Jupiter over the last year as Jupiter made its way through the sign of Capricorn, where of course it's not at its best, it's in its fall, and we've had a fall in the stock market. And also if we look back to when Jupiter and Pluto were last together, that was in 2008 in Capricorn, we had a fall in the stock market. If we go back to that eclipse cycle beginning in 1984, guess where Jupiter was? Yes, in Capricorn. And guess what happened that year? Yes, we had a fall in the stock market. It wasn't perhaps as quite as catastrophic as 2008 or perhaps even 2020. And that might be because when Saturn and Mars are together, particularly in the sign of Scorpio, which is very much about marshalling investments and pensions and all the rest of it, I think that Saturn was probably a stabilising influence, and all that Gemini stuff was in the 8th house of business anyway. But the Dow Jones did shrink 4% in 1984, so we can see as Jupiter makes its way through Capricorn every 12 years or so, it's not for the best when it comes for finance, investment, business generally. So as we come into this new year, Jupiter and Saturn are together and they are still co-present, and some astrologers would argue therefore that because Saturn is the co-ruler of Aquarius, the traditional ruler, that some of the more cool repressive energies of Capricorn will still be to the fore. And they could be right. But for me, I think it's more about detachment. So what we're going to get over the next 2.25 years as Saturn makes its way through the sign of Aquarius is the Aquarius energies of kindness, of fairness, of truth can be melded to the more reserved nature of Saturn. So, for example, home working is very Aquarius, which has come about more because of COVID-19. It's very Aquarius, very independent. It's using technology, which Aquarius also welcomes for its modern ruler of Uranus. But in actual fact, I think it's going to lead to a lot of creeping isolation. I think people could kind of start to see that the world could become a kind of dystopianly detached place, which is not necessarily quite the utopia that people talk about for the Aquarian age. But that's where Jupiter can be a modifying influence for the cooler energies of Saturn. And I think the two together, as we turn into this new year, are going to be for the good. So this year is going to see Sagittarius and Gemini eclipse energy, apart from one lunar eclipse which will occur in the sign of Taurus. But what's really important is that Neptune, the planet of dreams, is going to be impacting all of these eclipses and also the North Node as we go through the whole of this year. The North Node is the kind of emotional direction of travel or society. It's in Gemini. It returns to 1 degree Gemini by the end of the year. But of course it's an air sign, just like Saturn and Jupiter begin the year in. So that airiness can be there, but that watery, eroding energy of Neptune can provide distortion. And I think the thing that's really going to be at stake this year, just as much as it has been in recent years, is the whole concept of the truth. You know, when we've got big media platforms saying it's not their role to govern the truthfulness or accuracy of what people say because everyone is entitled to an opinion, we're heading into really dark territory in my viewpoint. Traditional media, even if you're not a fan, has to live to certain parameters that come from regulation, even if sometimes they have stepped outside of it, probably quite often. But there is some regulation in place, whereas a lot of new media doesn't have any regulation, and that means that truth or facts get distorted to suit particular people's agendas. And I think we are going to still continue to have a lot of that in 2021. Now, the other thing that perhaps is not quite so well known is that although Jupiter will like being in Aquarius, and it is going to be much more expansive than it has been in the sign of Capricorn, it's not going to stay in Aquarius for the whole of this year. It's going to move mid-May into the sign of Pisces, and it's going to be there through to the 27th of July. Now, Jupiter, in fact, is the ruling planet or the co-ruler of Pisces, so it's returning home, and so that's an interesting one. But it does start to go into retrograde from the 20th of June for 4 months. So I think we might see a revival initially in the cruise industry by the middle of May. We might see bookings starting over again if COVID is coming back under a bit more control, as I believe it will. But I feel that once that retrograde begins, it is going to be very interesting how that affects the cruise industry. And the other thing I need to tell you is that in astrology, when we take a particular point like that solar return at the start of the year, we get a map just like your personal horoscope. And that solar return, I've created it based on universal central time. And the ascendant is actually in Libra, which is very much about finding balance. But the midpoint between the sun and the moon's in the sign of Leo as we begin this new year, and the sun will be in Capricorn as usual. So the midpoint between the two is 21 degrees in Libra. So this is going to be very much a Libran year. And 21 degrees Libra is quite a fascinating point, because it is going to be next to, or very close to, a fixed star which has the characteristic of both Saturn and Jupiter. And that fixed star is called Foramen. And Foramen is very much to do with journeys, particularly sea journeys. It's said to be broadly optimistic, but it can see passages from quite tumultuous events to much more enlightened understanding. And that seems to be where the world is at the moment. We have an opportunity to change how things are, but just finding a vaccine for COVID is not the answer. Many of us won't take it. And of course, many of us don't want to be ruled by fear, so we're going to carry on our lives. So it's an interesting fixed star to have on that midpoint, but also the midpoint is ruled in terms of the 12th harmonic, or the Dward, by the sign of Gemini. So, you know, I'm talking about this Saros eclipse series being very much to do with the polarities of Gemini and Sagittarius. Gemini, quick wits, communications, sharing of information, and the higher energy of Sagittarius. Now, like all zodiac signs, I'm not talking in terms of your zodiac sign or how you live within your zodiac sign, because we all have a choice to live to the best of our zodiac signs, or there is a more base instinct within each zodiac sign, and everybody has a choice. But this year predominantly is going to be about finding balance. It is going to be about communication, and it is going to be about trying to find a search for truth. Now, I mentioned before, what did I say for 2020? Well, the midpoint was actually in Aquarius, and it was conjunct Venus. And Venus in Aquarius is very much about us as a collective. And also it was in the 4th house, which is about our sense of security. But we also had Neptune conjunct the moon as the solar return began for 2020. Quite incredible. So the Neptune in the sign of Pisces, which it governs, conjunct the moon. And Neptune is very much about gases, infections. It can be about uncontainable situations. It can be about distortion. It was also potentially very much about spirituality. It's about healing. But having that conjunct the moon for the world collective, where we all found out that wherever we lived in the world, we were all connected to the same issue like never before. That's quite extraordinary. And the other thing that all astrologers knew, of course, was that we had the posse in Capricorn of Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. So most astrologers believed that there would be a crash in the stock market, so we weren't wrong about that. But the implications of this infection, COVID-19, very much was there in the stars. So this year, you can see that Neptune energies are still going to be very important, and that potential for distortion or dishonesty, perhaps from politicians particularly. It can be to do with how information is shared on social media platforms particularly, but it can also be to do with our imagination, or that we have choices about the way we want to live our lives. But Sagittarius generally is very much about travel, and I think the travel industry will get revived this year, but I think we're going to see changes. So we're going to see more temperature tests at airports and ports. We may see some very quick COVID tests being enacted, which will give very quick results, and we'll start to see more and more travel picking up. It's a fact, because people don't like to be contained. And Sagittarius energy is about adventurism. It's about being very independent. And last year was very much about being locked in, which was very uncomfortable for many of us, because above all else, Sagittarius energy is about individual freedom. So this year is a very, very exciting year. It does give us an opportunity to bounce back. It's not going to be without big challenges. We do have a very pressing right angle between Saturn and Uranus, the two rulers of Aquarius, which is going to go on to about the 31st of July. It comes back from around about the last 5 days of November to the end of the year. And that's a really difficult aspect, I feel, because Uranus, of course, is in the sign of Taurus, and that's very much to do with resisting change. Taurus likes continuity, whereas Uranus likes to shake things up. So our attitude to the earth, environmentalism, how we live, how we consume, which Taurus energy is very much about as well. It's what we enjoy eating, drinking, spending our money on. Bit of luxury. We love, all of us love a bit of luxury. But that's being tempered by this potential new world order that Jupiter and Saturn initially are bringing in the sign of Aquarius, plus that solar eclipse energy that really came in with such a hurtling ferocity in its wonderful trine with Mars on the 14th of December. We've had Venus move in mid-month December into the sign of Sagittarius. So it's a much freer, looser energy as we come into this new year. But stay with me now to get the inside track on your zodiac sign, because I really feel that this is a year that we need to be informed about like no other. Hello Taurus, and welcome to your year 2021 deep dive special. Now this year is characterised by the continuing journey through your sign of Uranus. Uranus can be a very exciting influence. It's very quick moving, it's lively. But I have to be truthful, it is known as being in full in your sign, F-A-L-L. That means it's at the opposite end of the polarity of where it's exalted, which is in the sign of Scorpio. But you probably know that Uranus is the ruling planet of Aquarius. So it's very much associated with technology, innovation, fresh approaches. It can be a quite erratic influence. It can affect our nervous system quite a lot if it's forging a placement to a critical point in our natal chart. I think broadly for you this year, it is going to be in retrograde through to the middle of January, and then it's going to be heading forwards. But there is a critical point in January for you, because I feel that when it comes together with Mars, which enters your sign on the 7th of January, I do feel that you're going to potentially, across the 18th and 19th of January, find yourself being quite rebellious in quite a big way about something that's been fermenting in the back of your mind for some while. It may be about work, it may be about a relationship. And part of the reason for this, Taurus, is because when Mars and Uranus get together, it makes us much more impulsive. But it also gives us the desire to be very much in touch with our need to be an individual, which is what Mars governs. And Mars, for the last 6 months of last year and that first week of this year, has been in a very psychological area for you, potentially dragging up a lot of thoughts, feelings, emotions, or even connections with situations or people from your past. especially if there are any angers or unresolved situations. But I think Mars moving into your sign as early as the 6th of January is really going to give you a desire to be on the case, be much more assertive about what you want for yourself, and coming together with Uranus across those 2 days is going to be a significant time for you. Now also from the middle of January through to the 27th of July, we are going to see Uranus in a clash with Saturn. Now they represent two very different energies, but are both the co-rulers or co-regents of Aquarius. So I mentioned before that Uranus is the modern, higher octave ruler of Aquarius. The more traditional ruler of Aquarius is Saturn. And of course that moved on the 14th of December last year back into Aquarius, joined with Jupiter on the 21st on the winter equinox. And so we have that wonderful conjunction for the first time since 1405. So this is really, really big stuff. And for you, it's all about your role in life. And I think what the lesson is going to be there for in the first 7 months of this year is that even though you have a real understanding and appreciation of continuity and security like no other sign, I think that's really going to be challenged this year, because there's a part of you that is going to be feeling a little bit itchy about change. Now, of course, you've had the gathering of energy since 2008 in your 9th solar house, beginning with Pluto, which has been very much about shaking up the status quo. But Saturn's a funny influence because, of course, for the last 2.5 years, until the end of this last year gone, it had been in your fellow Earth sign of Capricorn. And Capricorn, like you, can be a bit resistant to change too. And yet, for you, this is your 9th house of travel, of new ideas, new philosophies. So if you've been learning anything, going through any studies, or becoming much more aware of how you can reshape your world through a greater understanding of philosophies, that wouldn't be a surprise. But it probably hasn't been without some resistance. Jupiter was there as well in 2020, pushing you to contemplate change. Uranus is pushing you to contemplate change, and yet there's a part of you that's very reluctant to join in because your sign is fixed. That's your quality. That means you feel most secure with familiarity. So with Saturn and Jupiter coming together as this year begins, and you have your solar return, I think it's calling out to you around your work or role in life, or something to do with property. And all those things can be subject to change. But of course, change sometimes can be unsettling, even if we do it for the right reason. So for example, if we leave a job where we don't feel appreciated, we're not very well paid, or not paid as much as we should be, but we've actually been with that organisation for a long time, we're going to miss our colleagues, we're going to miss the parts of the job we do find gratifying. And even if we find a new job which recognises our talent more, pays us the appropriate rate, but it's in a different setting, or we have to travel, or the people aren't quite so friendly, whatever change we bring about in our life, it will always bring a reaction. There will be a response to that change. And I think that's really what this year calls out to you. The potential to make some big changes is definitely there and can be exciting, but it may also create some discombobulation in the process. Now, Mercury, the planet of communication, is going to be going through 3 retrogrades this year, but all in air signs. Last year it was a very splodgy year because in 2020 we had 3 water sign Mercury retrogrades. This year, therefore, it's more about how we think, and it can be about contracts. So for you, towards the end of January, we do have Mercury going into retrograde around where you work. So if you are thinking about negotiating for a new job, attending an interview, from before that time really, because of the shadow period, and through to the 11th of March, I think there can be some uncertainty around your work. But I think what you need to do this year is kind of decide that you're going to make friends with the concept of change. even if you have a long-standing relationship with your friend called Steady Eddie. Now, Steady Eddie really likes you too, but Terry the Change is actually good fun because it pushes you out of your comfortable routines and it gives you a sense of feeling alive. So try to get more familiar with the concept of change, and I think it will help you to progress all the better. Now, we do have a very important relationship between your ruling planet Venus and also Neptune as we start this year. There is a square. So for you, Venus is in your sector of lust and sector of desire, and it can be linked to money, but it's in a right angle with Neptune, which is in a much more idealistic and spiritual area. So if you find yourself attracted to a friend, which Neptune represents as well in your 11th house, just be conscious of what you might be getting into. Also, somebody that you meet afresh could be very desirable, but there may be something about them that you don't quite know about, because Neptune, especially in Pisces, can lead to secrets being held, and Venus in your 8th house in Sagittarius is very much about getting stuck in and enjoying the goodies. And there's nothing like a Taurus person. I have a 2nd house Mars, so I really get Taurus energy, and my vertex is also in Taurus, so there's nothing like us Tauruses for appreciating the good things in life, whether it's a nice meal, nice glass of wine, something a little bit more sensual, or it is something a bit more high value when it comes to loot. So whatever you desire as this year begins, just make sure it's for real at some kind of level. Now, because my eyes are deteriorating by the day, it seems at the moment, I'm just going to put my glasses on, so if you would kindly bear with me. Thank you so much. So we are going to have, from the 15th of April to the 8th of May, Venus is going to be in your sign. So that's a wonderful time for you to draw new goodness to you, perhaps a new lover. It may be a great time for you to give yourself some kind of glamorous makeover. I need to tell you also, from the 7th of December to the 31st of December, Venus is going to be going conjunct Pluto. If you are still single by the start of December, a real hot romance can rock the end of this year for sure. But also be aware that Venus does go into a retrograde in December on the 19th. And as ever with retrogrades, it's all about understanding the less obvious elements of our desires or motivations. Now, from the 11th of September to the 6th of October, you also have Venus in your 7th house. So that's a great time to be reaching out, trying to sort of make more improved and harmonized relationships. Now, there is an incredibly important lunar eclipse for you on the 19th of November, and this is going to square up to Jupiter. So just be aware of that. Again, when it comes to whatever you desire, whether it's a job, whether it's a house, a new big grander place to live, or it is somebody that you develop a fascination with, just be aware that Jupiter can create a kind of a rapturous desire for something just at a time when you may need in some ways to keep things a little bit on an even keel. Now, Jupiter is going to be moving through 2 signs this year, and from the middle of May through to the 27th of July, it's actually in your sector of friendship, and that could be a time when you do encounter some new people, some new exciting groups. Now, he does go retrograde from the 20th of June through to mid-October, so generally when it comes to your higher aspirations or your ambitions, just be aware that things can slow down somewhat. Now, Jupiter is also going to be incredibly important because it's forging a square to Uranus as the year turns, so it's part of your solar return. Think of what they represent. Jupiter's about growth, Uranus is about innovation and restlessness, and of course Uranus in your sign is about kind of resisting change. So again, there could be a job that comes up or an offer this year which may mean that you do have to step outside of that proverbial comfort zone, which could prove to be a little bit scary, but also really life enhancing if you go for it. Now also this year we do have on the 10th of June a wonderful solar eclipse in this Saurus series that I told you about in my intro. And for you, this squares up with Neptune. So when it comes to the management of finances, you have a reputation of being someone who really enjoys the good things, but also can be pretty shrewd, and you've got your head screwed on well. And that's going to be very important in the second half of this year, because from the 10th of June onwards, that square with Neptune can create an unreality. So for example, if you have a friend who's saying, look, I've got this amazing scheme that we can all bounce back from COVID and make loads of loot by doing this, that and the other, I would be extremely skeptical. But for you generally, that solar eclipse is also about developing what your core values are, because all our values have an opportunity to constantly evolve. We are given the messages of our parents when we're children, but we live in such a fast changing world. Whatever was applied 2 years ago is unlikely to be quite as suitable now, although some values such as good manners, courtesy, consideration are things that can serve us well for a lifetime. But I think generally you could be developing new philosophies in the second half of this year. Then we have the second solar eclipse within a year in Sagittarius on the 4th of December. And for you, again, this is about the potential for business. If COVID has changed your role, that square between Uranus and Saturn, which starts the year off and goes on through to the end of July, is kind of saying to you that maybe working for yourself may be one of the options that you have. And I think the solar eclipse is certainly going to see you having lots of dialogue, but also thinking very carefully about how you can juggle all your resources. Now, in terms of the retrogrades on Mercury, from the 30th of January to the 20th of Feb, generally speaking, in the 10th house, your world of work, that can be a time of change. 29th of May to the 21st of June around your resources. That also joins in with that solar eclipse. So the potential to be told something with Mercury square Neptune that's just not true in a commercial, professional or financial situation is really strong. Do proceed with caution on that solar eclipse with Mercury retrograde then. And then from the 24th of September to the 17th of October, we also have a retrograde in the sign of Libra. Now, Libra energy for you is all about the detail. So that's not a bad area to revisit. So if you have details in your life that aren't working quite as well, or domestic appliance, 6th house, organisation is a bit on the blink or needs to be changed or renewed, or you may start to think about a new way that you can organise your life, perhaps also fresh approaches to diet and exercise and fitness routines. But for you generally, this is a year when you can make a real big impression by raising your profile, and the attention can come to you. I just think it's about handling your own disinclination towards change. And as I said, if you can make the concept of change your best friend, even if you're kind of a bit reluctant to promote this person above Steady Eddie, who you've been friendly with for years, it's really going to help you enormously to thrive, Taurus. If you'd like to go beyond your zodiac sign and really grapple with more serious astrology and find out what this incredibly important year holds for you, I can produce your map of this year, your blueprint, your celestial blueprint, and an interpretation of it. But if you order in 2020, say in September or October, I'll give you the rest of 220 free, as well as all of 221, plus your character analysis, and you can get 30% off, or you can choose to read my testimonials below and have a one-to-one with myself. But I'm wishing you all the very best for this new year. Please take care. God bless, good luck, and goodbye.